I am stoked. Should we like jump into some painting? Or I was just realizing like this is the first time we've ever sketched together in real life. Well, not in
I
real
know,
life,
that's crazy,
digitally.
isn't it? Should we say a little welcome to the few folks that are here first?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Why don't you intro yourself?
Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Claire Giordano. You have probably seen or come across my work alongside Max's in the outdoor painting space before. And I'm tuning in here from near the Seattle area down in Washington. My landscape does not look like the photo behind me right now. That is from a hike earlier this season, way across the eastern side of the state. Around my house is beautiful evergreen trees and all kinds of big conifers. And Max, you're tuning in from up in Alaska in Anchorage, right?
Yeah, I'm up here in snowy Anchorage, Alaska. This is Charlemagne, the studio cat. He may or may not absolutely destroy whatever I make. It's kind of a toss up. And yeah, I'm excited. Claire and I have been like painting adjacent for so long, and I used to live in Washington. I went to school at Western Washington University, and so it's really fun to be able to paint a view like this today. I'm just stoked, especially because it's kind of a nasty, like warm, melty, snowy day. So it'll be kind of nice to get a taste of summer.
Oh, yay. And I'd love to hear from folks in chat to let us know where you are tuning in from. It's super fun to get to see the wide variety of folks here, especially those of you who are tuning in like with the wonderful last minute, just spontaneity reminder of all this. So thank you for joining us live here. And the painting that Max and I will be working on is an interpretation of a scene. It's a photo I took in the Glacier Peak Wilderness area. And this was I was up above and kind of in between the different Lyman lakes. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with that area, but it's like one of the most beautiful, also one of the most buggy. I think that might have been like it was literally too buggy to paint in that stretch. I could not stop. I tried to eat something with the head net. Like they would like it under. It was just I have a limit for bugs and it's very, very high, but that reached my bug quotient. I definitely want to stop and paint. So now we get to paint it together. So I'm really excited that we get to enjoy this early summer scene where we have this beautiful, super bright green meadows, the trees, and then all the lingering snow on the peaks in that area.
Oh, to the tables. This sounds
Yeah,
great.
yeah. Should we switch cameras? It'll take me just a moment here as well. So give us a minute here, folks, while we get
All
ourselves
right.
turned around.
Just tracing here. So Claire's good enough to send over a square, and I put it as a little square. I'll be using trail tiles today, which are just standard, what is it, 310 gram watercolor paper. But I have found this great trick where if you get the right size, you can place it on top of it, and then you can either put this on a window, or if you have like a little light box or something, I often find like the scariest part to be the actual tracing of something, or like just the making the outline of something is always the worst. But if you have a little bit of light and two sheets of paper, all of a sudden, kaboom, look at that. It's basically, well, you can't see anything, I'm sure, but check this out. I can just trace everything, and so that's what I'm going to be doing. Claire has an advantage because she actually painted this and probably knows like you've got like muscle memory of the fingers and everything.
Well, the funny
But
thing is, and I may have to try to find the original painting for like the original version of this. So I wasn't able to paint exactly here, but I ended up painting a version of this from way up above at this high pass. And I went even above the pass up on a shoulder, cloudy peak. So in a little interim here, I'll find that for us because it's very similar. It's so fun to get to see it from a little different perspective. So yeah, for mine, I have the little sketch I made for you guys to see. But I ended up just recreating that sketch on I'm on a 5x5 piece of paper because I have not worked as small as the trail tiles in a long time. And I was like, oh, this is feeling a little anxious almost, being so tiny. So I decided to be a little bit bigger and it shows up a little bit better with my camera setup. Max is a little bit more fancy where he can lock the focus and stuff. So yeah, and Max, how's your sketch coming along? Oh, you're going right to the ink. That's fun.
yeah, I didn't, my grandmother would sketch this way, and for the longest time, I was like pencil and all of those stuff, but I always like admired the way that she was just bold. It's like if I did crosswords, it'd be like the people that do, crosswords and pen as opposed to pencil. But yeah, I can't do pencil too much. Like I love pencils, colored pencils in particular, but like if I'm actually making a traceable outline, like just like a straight graphite pencil, I just don't do it, except for big exception, the winter. Oh my gosh, I have not found a pen that doesn't like smear at -10. I don't know. Do you have any like is pencil kind of your go-to in the winter? What's kind of your winter sketching strategy?
I think you're exactly right. Like I always get so excited and ambitious and like I can totally put a pen layer and then I ended up having to keep that just as a pen sketch. And to be honest though, like I can't do too much winter sketching if it's really cold. I have terrible circulation. So I end up like most
Hmm.
often taking reference photos and then I mean I aspire to do more, but honestly, it's just a struggle even on like a normal hike to keep my hands and feet warm without stopping for an hour. With the exception of occasionally in a ski resort, I will have a ton of fun doing a little sketches from the chairlift, kind of like you were doing, because it's like a short little contained moment.
It really is. Yeah, it's tough. And I feel like I do a disservice because like I often post these, huge time lapses and stuff where you see like some massive painting coming together, but like that'll be over 3 days. And then just because of life, you have to compress it down to something little. But that's actually why I've really started to work a lot smaller, is I have a 2-year old now, and so it's sort of like the amount of time I get is just so much more compressed. But you can still make a really fun sketch pretty small. So I've been really enjoying that, which is funny because I've always been told like real art happens big, like huge, full sheet, massive, enormous paintings that get sold for thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. But like I like these little things so, so, so much. But
I
I
couldn't
don't know. Like
agree.
were you ever like pushed that way? I always feel like artists are always like told like if it's not, the size of a building, it's not worth doing.
I couldn't agree more, Max. That was a phrase I often repeat for my students, which is every painting is an adventure, no matter whether we're painting from our studio as we are here, or if we are out somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Like, no matter what we're doing, a painting is a creative process that's going to have a challenge. And I mean, the definition of adventure in some cases is like, are you being pushed outside your comfort zone? And every painting takes me outside my comfort zone. So what I love is that,
Right?
we can have adventure no matter where we go.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm glad to hear you say that too, because I see other artists and I'm like, oh my gosh, they must have such an easy time painting all of the time. Like, why is it so hard to even put a single line on a sheet of paper? But I feel like that never goes away. We just come up with better and better excuses to get ourselves started. And then once you do it, you love it. But I don't know, like I've never those 3-year-olds that just get started immediately. I'm so jealous of them. Like they just get it. Kids get it. But you kind of gotta, as an adult, you kind of gotta work your way back into that state.
I agree. So it looks like you have your sketch finished, Max. I can zoom in a tiny bit. So Max and I have gone for kind of opposite approaches here for our initial sketch. He's gone really heavy. And this was just the line work for you guys. He's gone very heavy into line work. I'm actually going to keep my lines super minimal, as you see here.
Hmm.
If I know I'm not going to be adding an ink layer like Max did, then normally I find that if I keep my sketch like this really, really simple and minimal, then I have more opportunities for the paint to do their kind of their magical thing. And Max, do you want to kick us off by adding some paint? I actually want to grab a little backing piece just to keep this piece of paper down here cleaner. So I'll be back in just a moment.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I'm curious how Claire does it. It's kind of like when somebody makes you make the first chess move or something. It's like, oh no, now she'll be able to react. So I'm going to grab some color. I've got just some basic colors here. This is kind of my standard eight. Although uh, to credit where credit's due, I never even heard about colors like cerulean blue and stuff until I saw Claire's work, and then it was like, what is that? So we've got some indigo, some purple. I don't actually know the names of all of these things off the top of my head, but indigo, purple, dark blue, light blue, cerulean blue, green, burnt sienna. I know that one, red and yellow. And I'm gonna start with a little bit of these. I love these lovely little snowy patches, and I'm gonna start with just a touch of some kind of those blues because I'm gonna kind of paint over most of them, but we're gonna kind of get that base coat going. So here's a little bit of that cerulean blue. And I'm just gonna like kind of load up a bunch. Looking at the reference photo here, I realize that I'm actually way off in my sketch. That's what happens when you kind of paint hastily and blind. But I'm kind of adding a little bit of that cerulean blue, especially in those shadowy areas, because snow is never 100% white, unless like you were looking, in a like dark chalet or something and you walk out and everything just blinds you, then it's 100% white, but that's just uncomfortable for the eyes. So you kind of want to temper that a little bit. So that's what I'm doing right here. So I'm just adding a little bit of that kind of tempering just to the edge, still leaving a few spots that are fully white, but adding a lot of those. And then of course I can add touch of water to kind of also smooth that out. What's your kind of go-to start, Claire? Oh, still muted. Okay. And the
There we go.
next
Okay.
thing, oh, all
Okay,
right.
okay, sorry,
Okay,
Max.
your move.
No, I was muted. I was grabbing my paper. So I was gonna say it's so interesting that like you went to the shadows because normally like I add them at a little bit later point because I get terrified of skies. I feel like I'm always going to mess them up. And I tried doing a split screen view, but I think since we're live streaming, I could not figure out how to get like our screens to work. So hopefully folks don't mind if we just switch from one to the other. And if folks have questions, please feel free to drop them into that YouTube chat there. We'll be happy to answer them as we go along. So I usually start with the sky because I get too intimidated. I'm using my favorite sky combo here, which is a cobalt blue plus a little bit of phthalo blue green shade. And in this case, I'm actually, well, first of all, I'm going to turn this thing upside down because I find that if I want to make an accurate line along an upper edge like this, then by having the painting upside down, I can have a much easier time of achieving that. And I have to make sure I leave a little bit of space for my clouds. And some of the clouds do touch right down to the shoulder over here. So once I get that upper edge done, and that's when I can switch to a different color and or different orientation and say, okay, now I can start dancing in some cloudy shapes. I'm trying to be somewhat efficient with my with my painting and not getting too attached to all the little teeny tiny details. And to be honest, for cloudy skies like this, like, yeah, I ideally kind of want it to look like the image, but if it ends up deviating and going on its own little adventure, then I'm not going to get stressed about it. What about you, Max? Where are you working on your
Getting stressed about it. That's where I'm at. No, that's interesting. So with I often yeah, hit the sky next. I can never decide between like doing the sky last or like first. Because like sometimes I do like to do it last, especially when like most of this is snow. Like if the top of this mountain was snow, I'd probably do the sky last because I love that look of when you get that, dark sky behind a mountain, like oh, when the sun hits it. But this is like my second favorite kind of mountain scene when you get that kind of nice dark mountain. So with the sky, this is kind of funny. This will work 40% of the time. So let's see if we're in that or in the 60. But I'll usually start with the cloud. So I'll add like a little bit of what is this, indigo? And oh, too much indigo. And I'll add just like a little bit up here because the sky is actually like when you blur your eyes, the sky is actually super dark. And so I use it to kind of cut through some of those clouds. So I'll add like a little bit of indigo up here and I don't know, kind of wherever the other cloud is, somewhere here. Maybe I'll do a touch of one over here. The nice thing too is you can always kind of paint through these things. And then I'll add a little bit of water because you want those, like I feel like with skies, you want a hard edge and you want a soft edge. You never you never have one or the other. Like a pure hard edge cloud looks fake and a pure soft edge cloud looks, well, like meh, just like a smudge. And so then I just add a little touch to the side of all of these things. And then, oh, I hope this works. Nothing like painting sketchy things on live. And then I'll add, oh, you have like in Alaska, this would be totally yellow and cerulean blue, but we're painting Washington. So I'm gonna use a bit of, well, whatever I got. It looks like ultramarine and cerulean here. And I'm gonna mix up a nice big batch of that, especially while it's wet. And then I'm gonna just blast through here, try to get more or less around those clouds, and then I'll just kind of touch them with a little bit of water here in a second. Oh gosh, the pressure.
You're doing
And the
great,
worst
Max.
part, thank you. You have to do like all of this at once, otherwise you get those hard edges. So it's like I feel like one of those those amazing Japanese painters that paint the dragon like all at once. It's like you get one brush stroke and let's see if it works. Okay, so we got all of that right to that edge. And then as soon as I am through with these, I'm going to be adding just the tiniest hint of water and hoping that that cloud works out. Okay, so this looks terrible right now, but let's see. It's it's also kind of nice to do it this way because it's like if you mess up horrifically, you're not that far into a painting. So I like this cloud start. Okay, so then I edged a touch of water and that softens some of the edges, but then it should potentially create some interesting blooms for the rest of the cloud. Ooh, I'm not sure how this turned out. Like I said, 40% success rate, but also you don't know for like 2 minutes.
That is awesome. And what Max is doing right there is what I also did with my sky. You might see how it looks a little bit different. And that while those edges were still wet, and because they were so hard, I took a somewhat damp brush, but mostly it was very lightly damp, and just scrubbed it right along select spots in that boundary of the white paper to the blue sky, and used that as a way to soften some of those edges. So you probably see now like it is much more embedded into the paper, and that same thing that Max is doing right now, but just a little bit more of a slightly more controlled approach in some ways.
Yep, I think that might have been the way to go. Although the nice thing with this is you always kind of do get some redos, so I'll be pulling some Charmin Ultra here, one of my most favorite art tools. Or maybe it's, I don't know exactly. It might be Kirkland signature, but a little bit of good old toilet paper or tissue paper if you're one of those fancy people. And then I'll just add like a touch to the edge here where I think I went a little bit too heavy on the cloud or a little too heavy on the sky. Okay, that's not terrible. I'm feeling better about it. I appreciate your encouragement.
It's coming together very nicely, Max, I think. Looking great.
It's always these guys are so weird. Like and then like you can hate it at the beginning of a painting and at the end it'll be like, "Oh, that was my best sky ever." Like I don't know, like do you ever feel like except for when it totally bombs, like do you ever have like the initial feeling be the right one with skies?
Oh, sometimes I mean, look, that's why I paint it first. Because sometimes if I feel like it totally goes catastrophe, I can just start over. But in the field, you can't start over. So invariably, my students laugh at me all the time because I will be sharing a painting like, I don't know if I'm going to share this painting class. Like, I don't like the painting. It's not working. And then a month or two or 6 months later or 2 years later, I'm like, I can't remember why I hated it.
Right? That turned out great. That was a wonderful one. Yeah. It's so funny. Like we can be such huge critics of our own artwork and then like honestly, if you put somebody else's name on it, it's like instantly that would change. Be like, "Oh, I love that." It's just like the process for some reason. We're so hard on it.
I agree. So while Max continues to make some really fun little edits to his sky, it looks like he's just doing some little taps there with a little extra water or that Kleenex there. I'm going to add in some of the color for my rocks since the way I'm going to progress through this scene is that I'll have to have my rocks be dry before I can then go into the foreground down here. So oftentimes when I'm working on a sketch like this, I try to have a mental map of what parts of the painting have to be dry and where do I have to go next in order to actually have it be finished somewhat quickly. I'm looking at my lighting. It's actually super funny right now. I have the sun is going through some fog and it's casting a really interesting, almost greenish light into the studio, which is really cool. The giant fern next to me, and I don't think it's helping with the green light either. For the rocks, I'm going to do a technique that I call wet next to wet blending. And this basically just means that I will usually have a handful of colors. I want some indanthrone. I think I'll use a little bit of, just for fun, I think I might even use some violet in this one down here. And then I also want to have some transparent red iron oxide, which is, I think, this little buddy right here. I think so. Or is burnt sienna. I can't, I think that's burnt sienna. Let's find out. I mix these two up so much and my students laugh at me so much. There we go. I want transparent red iron oxide. So wet next to wet blending looks like this. We start somewhere that has an area of rock and we just paint it around where roughly where that rock goes. And then when we get into another area, if I want to change that color around, I grab the other color and just let these areas one next to the other blend into each other and ideally hopefully do a lot of the hard work for me of creating interesting textures and patterns, and I hopefully don't have to be belaboring the point of making every single little rock pattern that I see in that scene. This gives me just a ton of flexibility to just not stress as much about how a painting's going to turn out. Like maybe I want some, so here's a snowfield, and if I don't get the snowfield exactly right, I don't care. Really, I don't. It's not a big deal at all. If I want to make a nice gray, I'll just add a little bit of that burnt, not burnt, the transparent red iron oxide to my indenthrone blue, and I can have a nice dark grayish, bluish color. Because really, I don't care exactly where all the rocks end up, right? As long as I have rocks and as long as I have snowfields and they are roughly kind of in the places they belong, then our eye will do an amazing job of interpreting that, wow, you did it perfectly. I have to remind myself of that so much. It's so easy to forget that, we don't have to be perfect. Does that ever happen to you, Max, where you're just like working along and you're just like stop and be like, I'm getting lost in the weeds of this painting?
Oh yeah, you're an artist, not a map maker. It's like, oh yeah, if they're gonna use this to traverse, if Alex Honnold is gonna use this as a free solo map, then yeah, maybe you should get it right. But like if that's not the case, then yeah, lay off yourself. It's fine. Nobody knows that that rock is slightly different. It's so cool to see you work, by the way, Claire. Like this is fascinating to see it come to life. I probably am gonna do that, but I usually hit the foreground first. I'm like usually bouncing so fast before between the two that like this hasn't dried yet, and I think I still might need a second or two.
You go
But
for it. Yeah.
I'm just gonna do a touch right here of this like lovely little sunny glade thing with a little bit of yellow and then a little bit of what is it, sap green, I guess. And while that dries, can I add a little person in? Okay, if I
I would
change
love
up
that.
your
Well, I had a student just asking me about how to add figures to a scene so I can send them this video and they can watch how you do it because I tend to not add as many figures to my scenes. I will do them occasionally, but I've just gotten out of the habit and I have to remind myself that, it would be really fun and it is really cool and a powerful storytelling tool to add that sense of scale and personality back into a landscape. Yeah, go for your little
Okay,
figure. And I've just been doing the
ready? All
same
right.
thing here all along. And maybe we'll switch back to Max here in a sec. But I'm just dancing the
Yeah.
paintbrush and those rocky shapes along this whole area. Really, like I said, trying not to be too attached to any specific outcome. And then the last thing I mentioned is I just try to fade these rocks a little bit lighter as I go down. So go ahead, Max.
Oh, so gosh, that is so cool. I could watch that days. Okay, so I added a little bit of yellow up here, and then put some sap green, and then put some blue, ultramarine blue, something blue. I have it written down somewhere, some dark blue. And then I'm thinking a little figure right here, just because like oh gosh, I feel like I just need that sense of scale, especially with mountains in like Alaska or Washington, because they're enormous. Like, and I love, especially with this, where you have like a little person, and then you see that that little person is little because there's some huge trees, but then the little huge trees are small because there's a huge mountain. Like, I love this kind of composition. So I am terrified of people. And so what I do is I just make them really tiny. And so I'm just going to add a little person. Let's make Claire here. Uh, you hike into the backpack, right?
Yes, I do. The big one. This trip was an 8-day trip. So my pack, when I started out, weighed about 47 pounds. And then I ended up carrying some student equipment for one of the people that I was working with in the field. So I
Oh my
ended up with a
gosh.
53-pound pack for a little while. Not my favorite.
Okay, so here's Claire with the absolutely enormous backpack, and like it's real like a person. They're basically like people are basically clothespins. You need like a loose head shape. A backpack is nice because that kind of takes up most of the body, so you don't have to sketch that. And then maybe you add a little arm or something with a little like a little hiking pole, and then blam, little tiny person. We'll even give you a bit of a trail just to be nice. And yeah, it's a small thing, but I feel like it kind of helps center me as well. It's almost like painting yourself into a painting, at least like a tiny little person. And then I'll add just a little bit of brown for that trail and let that dry because I'll probably paint in the rest once the other piece is dry. And now for my mountains, I'm going to do something very similar to what Claire's up to. I just
You
don't
you
know
go
if I'll do
for
it
it,
as
Max. Like
eloquently.
my mountain is now in its dry time. I artificially carried this, maybe not artificially, but I carried the mountain color down quite a ways, just so that way I wouldn't end up accidentally with like a weird background. Like even here, I want to make it a little browner. That way, the stuff that shows through behind the trees shows accurately. And there is actually a lake back there. So just for fun, I am going to take just a tiny bit of my cobalt blue here, not cobalt, my cobalt teal blue. There we go. And just drop it right into there to give the tiniest impression of that lake, just in case my trees don't end up covering up everything. So go for it, Max. This has to dry before I can proceed.
Oh, I didn't even notice that lake. Oh my gosh, that is cool. Okay, well, I'm gonna starting with that there. A little bit of teal, or in my case, cerulean and a touch of green. Let's see. Yeah, something like that. That's right. It's not like the person who actually took the photo is watching or anything. Okay, a little bit of very green lake in this case. And then yeah, same kind of here. I add a little bit of that kind of dark because I'm kind of a messy painter when it comes to this, and I gotta do the finger test just to see how dry everything is. I'm kind of liking those clouds actually. They did turn out just bizarre with that wet on wet, but I like that energy they're bringing. Okay, looks like most everything is dry aside from that little bit. Charmin Ultra will fix that. Blam. Okay, and I'll do something kind of similar. I add probably the lighter stuff and then slowly add the rest, the little pieces. So I usually start with it's actually kind of the reverse. I'm used to it kind of going brown to green. We actually kind of hit brown down here and then work up to purple. So I'll add a little bit of burnt sienna, whatever we got going on here. I made some mistaken lines, but we are being nice and generous with where things can go today, which is great.
This is a very forgiving landscape, which is why I chose it. For anybody painting along, you do not have to get the rocks where they show up at all. It'll work just fine without it.
That is the permission I needed. Okay, great. Well, in that case, here comes some burnt sienna all over the place. Um, Scooting that around. Oh man. Yeah, it's kind of like you're just guessing a little bit like at some point. It's even in the field, I do find myself doing that. I'm not sure if like if you get accurate like in the field, Claire, but I will find it's like, all right, there's a ridge, and then after that, it's like, some rocks or something there. I do try to make if I line it up. I often do it where I hold up the sketch and it lines up. I do try to make sure that like the key edges line up. But aside from that, it's anybody's guess. Okay, so we got a little bit of this kind of nice brown, it's burnt sienna, and then I kind of touch probably some purple. Yeah, I don't know. Yours is so accurate in color, Claire, but I definitely I feel like I've been here. Like I feel these colors. They feel almost like Alaskan in that way too. So I usually kind of hit some alpine purple from that burnt sienna. Just let everything mix and match.
Your bright colors, Max,
And
are one of the things I love the most about how you work. So I mean, I was very excited to see how you would interpret this scene with those bright colors and stuff. And I had the advantage of having painted here before, so I had the home field advantage.
oh, well, the reason for the bright colors is that I usually only have eight. So it's kind of like, well, I wonder what color that is. My choices are purple and blue. So I guess we're going to go with purple. Um, But it's kind of funny because it didn't start that way. It started where it was like, oh, I can afford two colors, so that's what I bought, and then you just happen to work with what you have, and then piece by piece it turns into something. A little bit of burnt sienna on this edge here, and then I'll be coming back in later with some hard shadows because you do get those lovely ones in the mountains. So some of them will be connected, but a lot of them won't. And then I'll come back in with some real kind of good edges, but I'll have to let it dry first. Get a little bit there. And probably some indigo on top. This is tough. I feel like I made that sky way darker than I'm used to. But it's so interesting how like skies change within like a region. Like you painted a lot in Alaska. Like do you notice you like mostly paint the same sky color, or do they change depending on kind of the latitude and spot you're at?
It changes so much, and I actually have well, obviously time of day too, but like I have some really interesting examples. I was actually just grabbing the painting I made like this from in the field, and this is a painting of the Atlan Lake, which I guess is not in Alaska, but I got here via Alaska on skis from the Juneau ice field, so I guess that kind of counts.
Whoa.
But this was like a super early morning before the haze and this big wildfire smoke rolled in, and it was fascinating to me, like how this sky stayed super pale all day, where back home, like it may have gotten a lot darker. So I wasn't sure if that was like higher elevation smoke or what. And a different day on that same trip, back when I was still up on the ice field, that sky was like completely different. I mean, there was no blue at all. And after this painting, I'm so glad I found this. All the little dots in it are raindrops. Because as I was painting it, these little like mist,
Mm.
like fry freezing mist things started to fall. So I was so thrilled like that happened just at the very end because this whole thing was painted, I don't know, over the course of like 30 minutes, 40 minutes maybe. And stuff dried just enough on the upper edge and then the rain started to fall. And I was like, ugh. But you can tell like the sky never did dry. So I had to leave a border of almost white paper in between where I actually like Max did took a paper towel and like dabbed along this whole edge in the hopes that I could then put in these mountain layers here.
Oh my gosh, what a wild thing. And
It
it's
was
so
so
true. It's
cool.
like, I guess like latitude, right? It's like the sun, when people say the sun doesn't go down, it's not like it just sits, especially in Alaska or, northern Canada, it doesn't just like sit in the sky. Like it does kind of shift, but at those like higher, it basically just does a hula hoop around the horizon, which is so cool that you can kind of get that like nice light. I will say I'm so spoiled in Alaska though, where it's called like golden hour for the filmmakers out there, where it's that beautiful kind of goldenish sunset, like half an hour before the sunset. And in Alaska you get, I don't know, like 6 hours of it or something like that. You get like 3 hours before and 3 hours after. But it's at like 2 o'clock in the morning, so it's just dangerous because you end up staying up way too late. I'm quickly moving into some indigo here. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling being bold. I just love the shadow above these mountains. So I'm gonna go for it. Let's see what happens. Have you
It's
gotten
just
into
so
indigo yet?
interesting.
I've like,
Oh, it was just so interesting, Max, to see like how like differently we approach the mountains. I feel like I often work as a typewriter, and you started like the opposite side, like you went from the bottom up, and now you're in the dark shadow. So that was fascinating to me.
oh, fun. Yeah, yeah. Well, and yeah, I'm for anybody who's on here from the Trailbound side and you want like an excellent teacher, you should check out Claire's stuff. Although I assume these are all Adventure Art Academy folks here anyway. But Yeah, Adventure Art Academy. Claire walks through all of these. It's amazing. But I would say like I'm slowly figuring out how to share my process, but I feel like I'm such an emotional painter where it's kind of like, oh, feeling the top of this mountain, feeling the side of this mountain. And I'm sure there's like, I'm sure my hands know what to do more than I do in a lot of ways, but it's funny. It's like, for me, so much of it is just by feel and, like, that works great until you're trying to explain how you got somewhere and you're just not even sure.
That is so interesting, Max. Because like when I first started, teaching my Adventure Art Academy classes, like this is a perfect example in this painting I filmed for my students on release here in a couple months. Like I was so nervous about what you exactly were talking about, and then I realized pretty early on, like there had been this dialogue happening in my head ever since I started painting, especially outside, like a dialogue with place and a dialogue with self, trying to decide what's the right move on how to approach this scene. And then it was just a matter of externalizing that in a way that got rid of the swearing at the mosquitoes. And also in a way
Yep.
that made it understandable and more structured. And what I've found is over time is that my painting process has actually changed, I think, because of teaching. So like like this is a perfect example here. Like I was starting to add some of these shadows here, and I just added those by taking a little bit of my cobalt blue and had it pretty watered down. And then if I wanted to fade an edge, had that damp brush off to the side, which also had blue on it apparently. But I would have, like you were saying, never would have thought that structured about, okay, are the shadows going to go on first, second, or third? Like I would have just put them on whenever I remembered them if I forgot about them. And now when I paint, it's like, oh my gosh, like okay, I want to have a mental map. I so teaching is really, I think, transformed and made my painting practice so much more efficient because when I'm teaching, I'm slowed down by having to speak. When I'm not teaching, I can go anywhere from 10 to 50% faster, which is pretty
Well,
eye-opening to me to realize.
when it comes to dealing with mosquitoes, that's extra useful as well.
10,000%. Like, I wonder if I can find. Okay, you show what you're doing, Max. I'm gonna grab another painting for us.
Okay, well, in the chaos, that is my painting. We have, I feel like it's like I love how the indigo kind of makes it start to come together, and that's a big thing I've learned, at least from the emotional side, because the first half of a painting is like it's ruined, it's terrible, and then and then it starts to come together and it's great. So the next thing I'll be adding is probably a bunch of these trees and kind of that stuff, but I don't want to touch that until this is all dry. So I'll kind of work my way up into it, which is going to mean painting these kind of little glades, which I really love. So there's the
I can
first
hop in
one.
too, Max, if you
Here
want
comes
to
the
give yours
second.
time to dry.
Oh no, that's okay. I'm going to work on these little glades here, which
Perfect.
is just going to be, I mean, it's going to take 10 seconds here. We got a little bit of yellow. I used to paint with green straight on, but now I always start with yellow because I feel like it gives this like luminosity to it. Well, depends on the green. I would love to have a green era. Like, I feel like I need to, I don't know, go live in a jungle or something for a year, but I feel like these alpine greens, I feel like I've really gotten comfortable with in a fun way, which is just a little bit of yellow and then you add a bit of green and then a bit of blue, and it just creates this like lovely uh sort of gradient of color. Because it's so tough with like grass. I mean, like there are so many different colors, and so if you just paint one green, it feels fake. Got a little bit of that, and then just a touch of blue down at the base. And because I already added the little trail that Claire is on, the metaphorical Claire, that I can just kind of highlight that as well by adding a touch of blue right along the edge. And I'll add in my little person last. I'll make them the kind of darkest. But I can't add that now until that is dry. So that slow chess game. What are you working on now, Claire?
So I was just mine, I think now is just dry enough, maybe. So I did the same thing Max did, the little finger test. Whenever I'm checking if I can switch to another layer or not, I'm basically checking like one, if I leave a little fingerprint behind, obviously we can't switch yet. And then two, how cold is that paper? If it's still really cold to the touch, like in my studio, that tells me, okay, where things are still evaporating, but hopefully I won't get too much bleeding and blending of my pigments out of the way where I don't want them. If I'm outside and feel that level of coldness that I am right now, I would actually give it another few minutes, actually, just because of the extra humidity outside. But I am sidling on over into my trees, and I'm trying to decide. I have two kind of options for how I would like to usually approach trees. One is either I'll just go right into them, but usually I want to make sure I have some kind of greenish base, like Max was talking about, because ideally I'm all about having as little to paint as possible and to do things as somewhat efficiently as possible. So I think to do that, I might go with some of this beautiful quinacridone gold here, which is not quite making that vibrant enough green. We are early season alpine meadow here, like Max mentioned. So I think actually Hansa yellow medium and cobalt blue, there we go. That's a much more accurate color for some elements of this. And I'm actually going to be pretty happy-go-lucky just dropping some of this in. And I want to make this quite wet because what's going to happen is I'm going to bring all this in this area and get the whole thing coated in some lovely, and I want to put some gold over here just for fun, a little bit of straight blue, trying to introduce some interesting color variation into that whole zone. Because then what I like to do, and this is my preferred way of handling trees and trying to be efficient and speedy. So once I have that base done, then I say, okay, now I can start painting my trees over here. And as I paint the trees, because the base below them is still kind of wet, the color from these trees will just blend right on down and go right into that whole zone and just makes my life so much easier because I can just give the impression of my dark trees. I'm very curious as far as the color of that. It was Indian throne blue paired with some quinacridone gold. And some of the trees I will call out more accurately, like I did those two, where they have a tall trunk and they have little side branches. Other ones, I'll just do a series of vertical lines and let them just give the impression of the trees, as
Oh
simplified
yeah.
as I care to make.
Gosh,
What
it's
was that?
so cool. Oh my gosh, it's like the stress of the cloud, like the doing it all at once, but you're doing the whole foreground that way. That's so neat.
Yeah, it's definitely not the most stress free. Let's put it that
Not the
way.
most stress-free. Yeah, no, that you could title a book about like painting that.
Exactly. And and this is also, I will say, like having the luxury of being able to do my trees at the same time as the stuff down below is definitely not something that I found a lot of my students can jump into with me. So it just takes practice to figure out the shape language for trees and like how the heck do we put them in. So oftentimes if I start to run out of my nice dampness down below, because I know that this whole zone is going to be nice and dark across here, I'll just add in a line of trees. It's not cheating. I'm just putting in the trees up top and then I'll go back in and refine those shapes more shortly. But that way I can take advantage of that still dampness down here to be able to get the effects that I want and I'm interested in for this area without losing the opportunity for all those beautiful, interesting effects. So I think I'm pretty decently happy with that meadow progression. So from here, all it
You
is
should
just,
be. That's gorgeous. Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, so from here, it's just a matter of saying, okay, now I can come back and refine my trees at a very nice leisurely pace in a way that I wouldn't have if I had tried to do them with that same level of detail all the way across. So if you're feeling anxious about being able to do that, just adding in the rough tree silhouettes and then coming back in and we can refine those shapes to our heart's content now because when we have a dark color over a really dark base like that, we won't see or notice all those funky hard edges that happen with our layers of pigment. That's one of the big fun things I've learned over time is that, okay, our paints can actually be really friendly to us. As long as we take advantage of the fact that we can have all this wet and wet or wet next to wet blending and then give ourselves the time here when we need it, like for these trees here.
Right. Huh.
And I'm
That
I'm
is
just
so cool.
I'm just trundling on trees, Max. So if you wanted to show us your trees, I'll just be doing the same thing for the next few minutes.
I'm thinking to go on a very different avenue here. Just kind of looking at yours. So my thoughts, let's see, I've got my little kind of meadow here, meadow there, and I've got this line of trees in the back. But what's interesting is these trees up front are technically darker. One of my favorite words is atmospheric distillation. Get real fancy with the scientists. That basically means that like the further back you go, the more blue and light it is. So like if you have a Smoky Mountain range, like the mountains in the far back are not darker, they're lighter, they're bluer. And I almost feel like doing a little bit of that with these trees right here. So I'd add these trees, and then once those dried, then these trees right here would be nice and dark and kind of bring that focus up top because your eye is going to be naturally drawn to whatever is the most contrasting in your painting. So I'm gonna try something. Let's see. There's nothing like trying totally new stuff on live. This is great. I'm gonna go
Exactly.
with a little bit of. I'm gonna start with green, I think, and then add blue on top of it. I'm gonna add some green just for those trees. I penned them all in, but the beauty with watercolor, especially when you work kind of bold, is like those pen lines disappear more or less instantly. They just add fiber really later on, so you can pretty happily cover up most of them. My mountains are still a little bit wet, but that's fine. I don't mind that the trees and the mountains blend a little bit. And so I'm just gonna add some green and I'll add some kind of blue, I think. And then let it kind of fade down. A little bit of green. Now let's touch it with some blue. Maybe some dark blue. Let's give that a go. A little bit of dark blue, light blue, something in there. And then let that do its thing. And then I'll add just a touch of water and hope that does some kind of cool bloom effect. So we got a bit of green, touch of water down here. Oh, looks like that was still wet. That's okay. I'm learning that that is actually going to be fun. Okay, a little bit of water, and now I kind of ignore that. Oh, no, I don't. I don't know if you feel this way, Claire, but like for me, the first half of my painting is to make it, and the second half is to ruin it. So I'm just trying not to do, just like trying not to do the ruining. But I'm just gonna touch more of these like nice sharp edges, kind of like what you did actually. I often like kind of get the shape of a tree, and then I'll come back in with those like this hard little branches, which is really all you see of a forest. You like see one or two little trees, and you're like, "Yep, that's a forest." All the rest is just white noise.
That's so interesting, Max, because I feel like, for a painting like this, where I had a pretty straightforward progression and I knew how I wanted to approach it, I feel like, it's like this one, like the painting came together pretty in a logical way. I usually feel like the paintings that most of the time go through a dramatic ugly phase where they look terrible for the first 75%. And it isn't until that last 25 to 5% where it's like, oh, it all came together. Okay.
Yeah, no, totally. Same here. Um, it's but sorry, I had to let the cat out. He saw a bird. He was about to cause some havoc. Well, okay, so I've got
That's
most of this
amazing.
done. Now, yeah, now comes the funny part with like this. I mean, this is what I love about painting outside is it's like so little of this is scripted, where it's like, okay, now that is having some time to dry. This is having time to dry. I feel like normally it's like, okay, and now a bear is coming, so I guess we're gonna stop that or pick the sketch back up. But with a little, oh, you know what? Actually, I'm gonna add some. This is a fun trick. I add a little bit of water. I'll break this edge, it's fine. But I add a little bit of water when it's like semi mostly dry, and it creates this wild bloom effect. It's so fun. Sometimes, but also maybe not. Who knows?
I feel like blooms are
We'll
that
see.
magical tool where like 20% of the time it does what you think it will, and the other percent of the time you have no idea what's going to happen and you do it anyway and you hope for the best.
Exactly. Yeah, this might be a painting ending thing, or not, or it could be kind of cool. Guess we'll find out. It's like just adding a random spice to a baking dish or something. It's like, oh, I hope this works.
Right. And sometimes
But while that
they work, and other times you should have grabbed cumin and you added cinnamon and everything tastes terrible.
exactly, yeah, you're like, ooh, that should not have happened, and I cannot take it out now. Um, Better add a bunch of garlic. I think I'm gonna, while that dries, I'm gonna jump back up here and try to add the rest of my indigo. We've got kind of some fun little, like this section right here should be a bit of a shadow, and then I've got this nice touch of lightness. So this is technically based on your photo, but also it'll just look conveniently good. But I love like the side mountains then when you can do this stuff and it kind of works its way back in. Are your mountains kind of one and done, or do you go back in and retouch them with different colors once you kind of have that lovely like the wet on wet side by side going on?
Ideally, I don't have to go back in. Sometimes I do, but like I just found it again, because I feel like I was not classically trained as an artist. I don't think you were either. It meant that I think both of us really learned how to paint watercolor dictated by the environments where we learned to paint them in. So often I just wouldn't have time to have the luxury to go back into a mountain, which is one of the reasons why I go so dramatically dark in that first layer and then just fade it down a little bit toward the bottom so I know it'll still work perspective wise. But I really realized early on when I first started teaching, people were like, oh my gosh, you're going to like 80% saturation and darkness right away instead of layering there in 10 layers. I was like, yeah, that's going to be the fastest.
Right. Yeah, when the mosquitoes are going to drain a liter of blood per hour, you gotta move sometimes.
Exactly. But yeah, so sometimes I go back in and I wonder if once I move this out of the way, I can show an example. Although I think in this example I have from up above this peak, I don't think I actually went back into any of these peaks either. I had to do some layering for some shadows, but that was about it.
Oh, interesting.
And it just, I will also say it took a long time. I mean, I've been doing field painting now for at least 10 years.
Wow.
And it took a long time to really get this technique down of, okay, having a map in mind of like, where is one color going to go and where will another color go, and just trust and they'll blend together. And I still make spectacular messes all the time.
Isn't that just like what painting is? Like watercolor. It's just like one spectacular mess that occasionally, gives you a fun party favor of a nice painting.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I'm thrilled. I'm like, wow, I gave this like a 10% chance of coming through, but it worked out pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
In this bottom portion, I was like, this works sometimes. Sometimes it's like, if this is a little bit too wet or too dry, you don't get any movement of the pigment. And there's ways to mitigate that after the fact. But this is a very happy occurrence when the bottom of that painting turned out as well as it did.
Oh, really? That's interesting because it seems so like on purpose.
I aspire to it a lot. And a lot of that, like you saw me, I got halfway across with the trees and was like, oh shoot, this is starting to dry too much. If I want this pigment to still move and bleed, then I'm going to have to just put the little tree silhouettes to start. So that's the kind of thing where just comes with time. Like students often ask, well, how do you know, like at what point to do stuff? And just building a knowledge over time and not intuition isn't the right word. It's literally just an observational practice of, okay, what happens at the different stages of dryness or wetness of my painting? And that's, I think, just what takes a little bit of time. That's one of the things I really try to help my students understand and see when I'm teaching is that, okay, this was an intentional choice and this was a happy accident, or I'm in the field and I need to leave now because a rainstorm is coming. So we're going to dash some paint down and see what happens.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So much of that. Like that's where a lot of my dark kind of vibrant colors came from. Is I was like, well, ruined that one. And then, it dried and a week later it's like, oh, that was lovely. And then that was like the level of darkness and then messed up again. And it was like, well, that's too dark or too bright. And then, oh, actually that looks okay. It's just like the whole style becomes a process of just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mistakes.
That's so interesting. So I feel like so often when people talk about watercolor and the way it's presented online and even the way it's often taught, is that it should be
Hmm.
this deliberate, super precise, layered approach. And I think that's one reason why like you and I resonate so much with each other as artists and watercolorists and teachers is because neither of us have that super painstaking approach. Like we're all about getting things on the page, like letting our experience of that place inform it in a way that's going to be, to me, much more fun to paint.
Right. Well, if you go into the field with the idea that it's like things are gonna be controlled, I mean, you better be in a fire tower where you can have, 2 days to really get stuff right, or be prepared for a rude awakening.
Exactly. Are you just
Okay,
waiting
well, I
there for?
might.
I put some green by accident where I didn't want it. Are you waiting for your stuff to dry so you can add in those pretty trees?
I am procrastinating a little bit. Yeah, so I've got
Go
so I've
for
got
it.
my kind of dark shadows there. So I'm liking how these mountains are all turning out. I've got my little figure, and if you see the reference photo, so I've got that handy dandy right there. But the reference photo, you've got these little bits of patches of snow, kind of in that like the spring patches of snow. And so I added just a few of these a little closer to my character to give them my Claire, to give you some contrast as you hike below. And so what I'll probably do is I'll add some of that brown undergrowth, which I love. I love the brown. Like that's gotta be one of my favorite. It's like in the winter, it's a pop of color. Like it's actually a nice warm pop of color. And in the summer, it kind of makes everything feel more lush when you have a bit of brown. So I'm hoping that the rest of this is dry because when I come in with these trees, they are going to be dark. They're going to be dark, 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 dark. So I'm going to try with just a little bit of brown right to the edge here and create some of those little patches of snow, just kind of for funsies. Um, Also for contrast. And then I'm going to add probably brown, purple, and then indigo. So it's not quite as extreme of a like you kind of get one shot at this as what you did, but it's going to be similar-ish in that it'll kind of all happen in one fell swoop. It's got a little bit of that brown here. Honestly, following a similar pattern to the mountains, which is cool because like nature totally, you know, follows in patterns like that. And it's convenient because if you only have 8 colors, you just kind of copy and paste. All right, so we got a little bit of that brown. And then next, I'm going to touch it with some purple. What's your go-to purple? I think I've got like dioxanine or something. Oh wait, no, hold on, I've got it right here. I'm messing with some. uh ultramarine violets. Yeah,
Ooh,
ultramarine violet.
interesting.
What's kind of your go-to for
I
purple?
have Carbazole Violet, which I almost never use and always forget about it. My favorite one recently has actually been a quinacridone violet. That's what I used in this painting. I like it
Oh.
because I really want to use purples, but then I oftentimes like when if I go too purpley, I get unhappy and it's like, oh, that didn't quite work for like what I was hoping for. This one dries like 25 to 50% more dull than how it appears at first, just because of the way
Huh.
like the chemistry of the pigment, which I like because I can go quite crazy with it and then it tones itself down for me.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay, so you're learning the
Yeah.
chemistry of this.
Yeah. But
Oh,
then the
I
downside of that,
personally
right?
love that purpleness, but you're right. That's like you gotta account for that.
Because here sometimes in Washington, like there'll be little hints of purple, but then in like most of the day, it's just so blue dominated. And I found that some of the other purples or even out in the rose oftentimes was giving me a little bit too exaggerated of a color, but it wasn't quite jiving with like the overall crazy blue cast. So I like that one. But at the same time, like my overall favorite rock mixture for a lot of stuff in the Cascades is actually my ultramarine blue, my rose, and my new gamboge, because you can create just a huge range of beautiful mauves to blues and grays. That's usually, and browns too. That's usually what I usually end up making my own purple effectively with ultramarine and rose.
Does anybody ever use old gamboge? What even is an old gamboge? It's weird that there's only the new one. Okay, I'm gonna stop trying to make joke about
I mean, I was
colors.
laughing, but I didn't want to like interrupt your painting, but I was over here cackling.
um, well, here we go. Okay, so I've got a little bit of that brown. Everything's kind of mixing together. I won't actually know how it turns out until it dries, but here we go. Jumping into that indigo. I think I might actually work top down just to give this like, a few more seconds to dry. It's like a test. Every second counts. Okay, a little bit of indigo here. Oh, I hope this is dry enough to do. Let's find out. Day one down. Let's see. So I'm hoping that this kind of adds this really lovely kind of like break of contrast with those mountains because I think that's what's kind of so cool here is you get like these different layers within this scene you set. So here's these dark, dark, dark trees, and then I'm letting them kind of connect with this background, kind of like how you did, but on a much, much smaller scale. Just to kind of let them do that thing they do. So there's shadows. Okay, that's looking kind of fun. Let's round two. Really kind of get these like little test patches, I feel. And often with watercolor, I'll pick like the least intrusive one. Like this tree is gonna be big. So this is kind of the one I'm worried about. But let's see how this goes. Nice big tree. Kinda kinda adding right down there, working it. If you're brave, it's like be bold, start cold, but I feel like with watercolor it should be like be bold, like do it in two strokes. But I'm not quite there yet. Adding just a couple little bits of line up here just to kind of hold that to the same pattern. And I'll add a few more over there, just kind of run it out. Oh, maybe I'll even add a few up here. Yeah, like I said, so much of my painting is just like, oh, this feels right. But the issue with that is it feels right until it doesn't feel right. And usually when it doesn't feel right, it's irreparable. Like first
Oh,
half
I
of the painting is
agree.
to make it, second half is to ruin it. And it's like, oh, that was great until it wasn't, and I can no longer fix that. But
It's so
that's why
easy
you
to
keep on
take
doing
it
more
too far.
paintings.
Mhm.
It's so easy to take it too far. Let's see, this might be an example of me doing that right now, but I'm liking where that's looking. So I might hold off right there, and then because well, I've got to go grab my dude and take him for a walk here in 5 minutes. I'm gonna add a little bit. Any chance you wear red when you're out in the wilderness?
I do
Do you
have
have a
a
red
very
backpack,
bright red
perhaps?
jacket, actually.
Phenomenal. Okay, great. Because I was gonna paint you in red regardless.
Go for
Need
it.
that paint like that pop of color. So here you go, a little bit. We'll add that red, pop of red right there. And I could paint a little indigo in there as well, but like I might wait for that to dry just a moment. I'm liking how this turned out. That was like the kind of the dark trees in the front, actually. I kind of like how it like draws your attention. This okay. It always comes down to like the last brushstroke, but I'm don't want to jinx it, but I am liking where this is going. How are you feeling about yours?
I think I'm done. Well, what's fascinating to me, Max, is like how different this of a story both of our paintings ended up with. Like it's like yours brings so much more of the foreground to life, where I was just like, yeah, the mountains are the primary focus, and the trees and the meadow are more of a supporting cast in some ways, or the contrast of those colors is, which is why I hope this has been super fun for folks to see, like how two artists, same scene, can choose two and ostensibly the same composition even could end up with two radically
Yeah.
different paintings because of just like what we were interested in. Like I didn't even notice the snowfields, truth be told.
Oh, that's why. Yeah. Well, here I'll pull this up here. It's wet, but I think I can focus up close. That's the thing with trail tiles is it really kind of they got to get up close and personal with them. But yeah, it's funny. It's like two totally different scenes made out of the same thing, but also like I love them both for their own way. Like I'd be so curious, to put 100 artists on this and then see what happened. Because I think you would end up with just such vastly different. And I wonder how much of it is like our own personal experience, like your eyes drawn to the indigos, the lights, or the person, or whoever it is. Let's see, there you are. Little tiny Claire. Yeah, that's so cool. Oh my gosh. How neat is that? We should do way more of these.
That was a ton of fun. I hope folks enjoyed it. Thank you all for joining us on this little painting adventure together. Yeah, and if folks want to continue to learn more how to paint from both of us, if you haven't, it seems like a lot of you are already from both of our communities, but if you haven't already, Max has an incredible series of classes through his website, Trailbound Sketches. And then I have a bunch of additional painting classes through the Adventure Art Academy, including the December class will actually be a very similar iteration of what we did together today. It was this painting here, so very similar scene, same mountain from different perspective, and then some wildflowers as well, which I'm so excited to share with folks. So I have an ongoing collection, Max does as well. And are always so excited to get to see folks what they're excited to come paint with us.
Yeah. Well, and if you ever have any questions, just feel free to reach out to either on Instagram or on the website. But yeah, trailboundsketches.com or trailbound sketches on Instagram. I often tell people like I don't have the answers, but I've probably made most of the mistakes. And I feel like that's what watercolor is all about. Like I can tell you exactly how much gin to use when painting in the winter. And that cost me almost some fingers. So if you have any questions about any of that stuff, definitely reach out. The world needs more artists, and it's just fun to paint it forward.
I agree. Yeah, we're both here to be a resource for everybody. And I'll be popping into the Trailbound Sketches Discord as well, so you can put questions and whatnot there. Otherwise, both of us, you can find us on social media and email. And thank you all so much for painting with us. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the live stream. So thanks for being here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Claire. This is so much fun.